Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the Doorstep podcast. I'm your co-host, Nick Gvosdev, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Council.
And I'm Tatiana Serafin, also Senior Fellow here at Carnegie Council, looking at what is going on in the world today and bringing back Carolyn Kissane from NYU's Center for Global Affairs to help us understand Biden's trip to Saudi Arabia. But before we go there and before we welcome her to the podcast today, Nick, we look at doorstep concerns every day here. We are obsessed with it. And today, this morning, as we're taping, the inflation numbers came out, which are way higher than people wanted them to be. And I'm wondering, what is your gut reaction to these numbers as Biden, he's already landed in Israel. They tried to tamp the flames by putting out a press statement saying, oh, gas is actually going down. But these numbers, I think, are going to stoke some fears and put a lot of pressure on him as he is in the Middle East. What is your reaction to these numbers?
Well, I had a chance also to look at some of the German polling data about economic concerns and how it relates to foreign policy. And I think what this is telling us all is it's telling democratically elected politicians in the West, in Asia, and elsewhere, there are ceilings to what you can do. There's only so much freedom of movement you have in global affairs before you start hitting up against these doorstep considerations. And that has to do with the willingness to continue to impose sanctions on Russia, the willingness to continue to provide economic assistance to Ukraine, just as two of the examples. But I think what we're seeing is we're moving into a summer where the doorstep concerns that you and I have been monitoring and warning about all spring are now coming to roost.
Yeah, and I'll be looking also at how markets respond today, because I think, I saw a couple of Wall Street analyst reports that are really getting concerned about equities. And certainly when the markets are down, I think everything is down, and they're very forward looking. They're kind of putting together a lot of events. So I think that is indeed going to put a lot of pressure on Biden, not only for today's summit, but also ahead for the midterms. And the U.S. presence in the world. We talked a moment ago offline about a summer of discontent. Biden's going with very low approval ratings out into a world that is very unstable. Boris Johnson just got kicked out. We had a terrible assassination of a very popular leader in Japan. Sri Lanka is a mess. The president ran away. The prime minister can't be found. What is your sense as you look around the world? Are people, because of doorstep issues, just getting fed up and kicking people out? And can the same thing happen here? Is that why we're seeing some of these low approval ratings? And how does that tie into how can Biden, exude gravitas when he doesn't have the support at home?
Yeah. Look, this goes back to when we had Nahal Tusi from Politico on the doorstep earlier this year, last year, talking about omni policy, that you have to think about all of these issues being interconnected. I think the problem that the Biden administration had is that they had the slogan, but too many people, I think, were still thinking of foreign policy as something the president goes out and does, and these domestic issues are something else. And we're seeing how closely integrated these are. Not just in the United States, but around the world. We're having the meetings in Istanbul again in an effort to try to unblockade, or to get Russia to unblockade food exports from Ukraine, grain, sunflower oil, because the world is realizing that this conflict touches them directly. Energy prices, commodity shortages, supply chain issues. When we had Peter Sand on a few weeks ago talking about how all of these networks are interconnected and how they impact people at home, and that people are holding political leaders accountable. And you remember last year, President Biden made a push about how democracies have to show that they can deliver in dealing with the challenge of authoritarian and autocratic systems. And this is showing some of the problems with that democracies around the world are under stress. And of course, the president is going as part of this visit to Saudi Arabia to interact with a major partner, which is very clearly a non-democratic state, and where the president has had, or the administration has had to walk back some of its rhetoric about human rights, precisely because they want to get energy moving, to see prices come down, and because they realize that the legitimacy of democratic governments around the world are intimately tied to these doorstep issues that we've been looking at.
And we're going to welcome Carolyn Kissane in just a moment to talk about those energy issues and her recent article, which started with, for Biden, you can't always get what you want. Welcome back to the Doorstep, Carolyn. We are so excited to have you here at this momentous week in the middle of the summer when a lot of people are away, and yet their vacation depends on what happens during this summit of Biden's in Saudi Arabia in terms of gas prices and the like, or maybe not, because we are so interested in you can't always get what you want. Your recent piece in Barron's, because I think it's true. Biden is out there doing a heck of a lot. I think he's meeting with 11 leaders in total over 4 days, which is quite an agenda. What do you expect to come out of this whirlwind trip? And to your point, he can't always get what he wants. And what does America want him to get? Can you kind of set the frame for us and expectations of what we should be listening for over these next couple of days?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you. Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you, Nicholas, so much for having me back again. I'm a big fan of the Doorstep podcast, and it really is a delight to be here again with you. So thank you. Thanks for the invitation. I think there's a lot on the agenda, and I think the agenda is somewhat it's going to be hard to get everything that the United States wants, because some of what the United States at least claims that it's going in to get, there's some contradictory messaging, at least the way that I see it. And I think the way that many people seem to be seeing it. The Economist yesterday came out with kind of a pretty scathing piece, like basically suggesting that this trip was a waste of time. I'm not that pessimistic, but I think this idea that, and again, this is where I see some of the very blatant contradictions, because, Biden and his Washington Post op-ed over the weekend, kind of saying that this is not about getting Saudi Arabia to pump more oil, that this is a Gulf meeting, this is going to Israel, this is talking to Palestinians. Again, there's a lot on the agenda, a lot of, leaders that will be met. But I think for the U.S. consumer that is feeling the pain at the pump, which we also know is very challenging, both politically as well as economically, and with today's inflation numbers, coming out at 9.1%. Which once you cross that, right, you've gone from the 8 to the 9, it doesn't sit well. So I don't think we're going to see dramatic change with regards to Saudi production, only because of their own constraints. I think we will see a bit more coming from OPEC, but again, they're limited. They don't have a lot of extra supply that they can add. So as much as I think the US administration may in fact want more OPEC oil, and specifically more oil from Saudi Arabia, there are just some physical realities around their extra capacity that they can bring to the market.
Well, that brings a whole set of issues that actually you've been working on for a number of years, which is the energy question, the climate question, and the human rights and social justice question, which is the Biden administration came into office. They talked a lot about putting human rights back at the center of U.S. foreign policy, that even U.S. partners wouldn't be getting passes on egregious violations. There was a lot of talk about we needed to make the jump to the green transition. We didn't want to see new investment in hydrocarbons. We wanted to put that. And now it seems that the Biden administration essentially is, if not publicly, quietly backtracking on both. Apparently, there will be a formal meeting with the Crown Prince, not one of these Washington generated, oh, we just happened to run into each other in the hall type of things. And of course, the emphasis on hydrocarbons, on dirty energy, so to speak, at least for the short term. Does that undermine Biden in these meetings, that the Saudis in particular will say, a lot of talk for the first 2 years of your administration, Mr. President, but now, the mask is slipped and you need us, and therefore we can dictate to you the terms of US Saudi engagement moving forward?
Nick, I would say that's like kind of, in my opinion, that's a perfect summary. And I think that is I think that's one of the big challenges of the whole entire trip, right? That I think maybe too much was said early on, on the campaign trail and early into the Biden presidency, making Saudi Arabia a pariah state, being very explicit about not having a meeting with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And yet at the same time, we have last summer, the United States kind of calling upon Saudi Arabia to increase oil production. And this was, before Russia's reinvasion of Ukraine. And then we had even just, I think it was just like a week before COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland, where the United States, I think it was Jake Sullivan, who also sort of called upon Saudi Arabia to increase production because they kind of needed to do it. And then, of course, we have the events that have, that take us to today, and Russia's reinvasion on February 24th, that this just has completely disrupted global energy markets on all fronts. So I think, the Biden administration has had to kind of, make a very public U-turn on many of the pledges that they had made. The fact that, Biden's kind of deep into his presidency, almost at the halfway mark, and this is his first Middle East visit, is also somewhat hard to understand. And I think Saudi Arabia knows that they're in a very good position. And again, this is one of the things that I tried to emphasize in the piece, is that there's the optics of the United States traveling to the Middle East, going to Jeddah, where there will be, of course, a meeting with Saudi's King Salman, as well as, with MBS. And that's for MBS, I would imagine that's like, I win here. Like, I'm the winner here. I have the United States in a difficult position. It's not he has the United States, but he knows that Saudi Arabia is too important for the United States, both for its energy as well as for kind of being a regional source of stability against Iran, right? So that, but again, I think, I'm a bit challenged, honestly, because it was just last weekend also that, Biden said that he's committed to making the, Iran deal work. Like, he's still committed, and the administration is still committed to making the Iran deal work. Again, I don't think that's necessarily the best messaging right before this visit and this set of visits, because for Saudi Arabia, that's been a point of contention since the Iran deal was first raised under the Obama administration.
It's so interesting to hear you hear you frame it in the MBS I win, because I'm thinking, what does that tell Putin? Oh, if I just hold out and you need my oil, I can win too. And I think, it's always difficult to make these, and we talk a lot about ethics here at the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International. It's a trade-off, right? Ethics is. So we are not going to press further on Khashoggi. MBS has taken responsibility. There's people have been punished, even though it led up to him. But yes, this idea of a figure like MBS, who has had a lot of press freedom crackdown, of human rights violations, quote unquote, winning, what does that tell other leaders? And that's what concerns me in these choices that we're making, and kind of taking it out broadly over the region, So in to your point on the op-ed that Biden wrote in the Washington Post, which I thought was really interesting. You place it in the Post where only liberals are going to read it. So who are you really trying to target? But he's saying that the Middle East is the most stable it's been in a long time, and this area is actually thriving. And I'm going, it was such a positive marketing spin on the situation. And yet I'm looking at it as what are you telling rulers that do crack down on human rights and women's rights? What is that messaging? Is the world going to be confused by America's global messaging?
Yeah, Tatiana, that's a fantastic question. And, again, going back to the ethics and the great work that the Carnegie Council does on raising these issues in the context of international affairs and the global landscape ecosystem that we live in. I'm very bothered by it on many fronts, because in some ways it is sort of pushing it kind of like, okay, of course that was important, and we tried to make it a big issue, and we kind of were standing our ground, but standing our ground only up to a point. And then when that point kind of crossed that threshold of, wait a second, we can't keep this stance, kind of like this pragmatism around, the role that Saudi Arabia plays. And, again, one of the things that I think a lot about with this visit is that MBS has a lot of enemies within Saudi Arabia. He has, you don't have to go back that many years where, he kind of went through his own kind of internal purging, even amongst family members. And, there are people who are not that excited to see him rise to be king. But in fact, I think this trip validates his position as the de facto king. At least that's how I see it. I do think there's probably an opportunity, and Stephen Cook, and another co-author, and forgive me for forgetting his the second author's name, did a CFR special report on this idea of the possibility of kind of a new US-Saudi security compact. Again, I think it's possible, but I do think that, Saudi Arabia has a significant hand, because we're not going back to 1945, where the United States was only kind of the only big player on the block. Now you have, China, which Saudi Arabia does a lot of business with, and China buys a lot of Saudi oil, much more than we do in the United States. And I think that, Saudi, and this, I think, Tatiana, going back to, part of your question that I don't want to not answer, but I think, a lot of countries have decided on a position of non-alignment, where they're not aligning with the United States and with Europe on their position towards Russia. They are not criticizing Russia. They are not saying that they take the side of Russia, but in effect, some of their silence suggests that, the non-alignment policy that the Gulf states have taken, I think Saudi again is a great example. It does give, I would imagine, again, if you're sitting with Putin and he's looking out at the world and he's saying, well, listen, if there was any idea that this was going to end quickly, and that the West's sanctions and, economic statecraft and this idea of making Russia a pariah, really sort of, excluding Russia from the global economy. I think we're seeing some of the weak links in that idea, and countries like India, countries like China, Saudi Arabia, that are kind of taking this non-alignment stance, I think in some ways could bolster Russia's position. And I think Russia's planning for a long, protracted kind of grinding conflict, which my hope, if I were more religious, I would say my prayers would be that, that the West does not lose attention, focus, and does not stop prioritizing Ukraine and the need for greater assistance, and that we don't really kind of move into deep fatigue and stop looking at it as a real sort of global threat.
Before we leave that theme on Russia and the Middle East, we should mention UAE. So it's not all about Saudi Arabia. There's a bunch of other countries that Biden's meeting with. And my concern, to your point, is that we have millions of Russians moving to the UAE, millionaire Russians and billionaires. I think Abramovich's yacht is stuck there, and he's looking at property there. And here's a storyline that nobody's talking about on this trip. Okay, Dubai has been absolutely vilified for a dirty money haven, right? Kremlin critic Bill Browder, who we'll be talking to in the fall, where we have a book talk with him, he's called for the emirate to be put on a financial blacklist. Everybody's accused the UAE of facilitating money laundering at a grand scale, and no thread there. There's no thread there. What do you think is going on with Biden in his thinking? Now you have, okay, we're putting aside human rights, we're putting aside green energy conversations, and we're also now putting aside financial laundering accusations. What are your thoughts on that?
Wow. Well, I'm going to definitely be tuning in for your conversation with Bill Browder. That will be a fascinating one. I read his last book. Again, you have to say, you imagine, like, President of the United States there've got to be priorities, right? You can't put everything on the agenda, because, you put too many priorities, then nothing is prioritized, right? So I think there are some, choices that are being made around, what should we really put our focus on? I think there is a really fascinating story around, like, Israel and Israel's sort of new relationships in the Middle East, both with UAE, with Saudi Arabia, again, not as explicitly, but you do have, which maybe would have been hard to have imagined even just 10 years ago. But today you have the semblance of some normalization and some potential, like, new alliances that would offer kind of the opportunity for kind of a new lens in terms of how we look at the Middle East, if you have Israel sort of playing a greater role and you have some sort of normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which some people expect to happen, not immediately, but that it's already kind of happening behind the scenes. So again, I think that's being catapulted more than, again, what are you doing to, support, protect, the Russians, the oligarchs that the Western sanctions have meant to kind of cause pain, right? So that their ability to do business, their ability to, have these yachts and homes and all these kinds of things, but they're also have the ability to just kind of transfer money to to places that will welcome that money. And again, I think Dubai has historically been a place. I used to, do a lot of work and lived in Kazakhstan, and for wealthy Kazakhs, Dubai was their haven. Dubai was their place to go. It was also a place where it was kind of open for business. Like, we won't ask a lot of questions, again, it's not my area of expertise, but again, I just don't see that the United States is seeing that as a priority for this trip. But again, it goes back to many of the contradictions that I think are so present that, on one side, it's, you're trying to limit Russia's ability to continue this war in Ukraine. And at the same time, you're kind of like, not sort of seeing what's going on in terms of how they're able to continue to, just move wealth. And you also have, you have on the energy front, you have a big issue with, China's continuing to buy Russian oil. It's buying it at a discount. India is continuing to buy it. And I was on a call last week, and someone who is sort of talking about India, and it makes sense. It absolutely makes sense. If you were to have this really super high energy inflation in India, that could be extraordinarily disruptive, not just largely across the economy, but politically disruptive. And so I think some countries are making these very national interest decisions to say, you know what, it's not ideal, but this is the situation as it is. We need oil. We would prefer it at a lower price than it currently is in terms of the global market price. And here's kind of a way to get it, and it's $30 less than the price of Brent. It's, you can kind of, when you start to sort of think about rational choice theory, and why some countries may choose to participate in that way.
Well, and I think that goes back to your point. I mean, it's striking that from Israel to India, the Middle East and South Asia has been really the parts of the world that have been really, we want to be non-aligned on this. We don't support the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but we also don't want to stop doing business. As Tatiana was remarking about the summer of discontent, you have politicians, I think, again, you're right about in India, that look at Sri Lanka or Ecuador and say, we don't want this level of unrest with high energy prices. And of course, if China's getting discounted energy from Russia, India better be on the same page, or India loses out. And also, I think your point too about Russia's relationships in the region, and goes back to Tatiana's point earlier about how we reintegrate MBS into if not good standing, at least taking him off the pariah list. When you were talking about that, I still was playing in my mind the mental clip of the G20 in Buenos Aires in 2018 with Putin and MBS high-fiving each other, and the hearty handshakes and the laughs and all of that. And really, I guess this question of, at what point, and the narratives, right? So do you expect, watching MBS's coverage in the US, are we going to go back to what we were hearing about, well, he's an authoritarian and he maybe, cuts corners and does some bad things, but on the whole, he's moving Saudi Arabia in the right direction, and he's a modernizer, and we better work with him because the alternatives would be worse? I mean, do you think we're going to start to see kind of an emergence of a narrative, even from the readout of this trip, that tries to square the circles as they were? Well, we want more oil, but Saudi Arabia is also committed to green transition, and we want human rights, but MBS is still moving the needle slowly in the right direction. And do you think any of this is going to work
So
instead.
I 100% think that that framing of the narrative will in fact be, I think, the predominant one, because there is this, I think, acknowledgement that more than likely, like, I would say that the, high likelihood that MBS will be the king of Saudi Arabia. And as such, the United States will have to work with him and will have to, so I do think there will be, and again, it's interesting because, again, going back to the, the Washington Post piece, and again, Tatiana, to your point, Biden knows that there are many Democrats who are not very happy about this trip because they do see it as like backtracking from those, commitments to sort of putting human rights first, for backtracking on the climate change commitments. What does this mean if the United States is in effect kind of asking for more oil? And this has, been part of like a year trend. But I do think because the trip has also been stated as not about more oil, that the outcome will be, wow, like Saudi Arabia is doing a lot on the technology front. Yeah. They are, they have one of the largest in the world, investments in solar. They are, sharing their technology. MBS Vision 2030, we've seen more openings for women in Saudi Arabia, more girls are getting educated all the way through graduate school. Like, there's that narrative of the modernization narrative that MBS has kind of launched and, made happen in Saudi Arabia. And then there's the, I think, there's the what we choose to remember, what we choose to forget. And I think what we're going to choose to forget is Khashoggi. I think that will not be part of the conversations. And that will be very intentional, for the United States to not, again, I think they'll say that they're going to they are putting human rights on this agenda for this trip. I think, it starts today with Biden and Israel. But, I think you have a lot of priorities where human rights may be part of a frame, but the larger narrative will be one of this will be a successful trip. This will have been one where the United States has, reinstated its position in the Middle East, that it remains an important player, that it has not been sidelined by China, that the relationships remain strong, that there remains a commitment. And again, you may even have a military security pact, some kind of cooperation that the United States will sort of reinvest in that historic relationship around security and U.S. military security in the region against Iran. Again, Iran being kind of, Iran being now the pariah, right? I think that will maybe be some of what Biden will be part of the narrative, is that, we have to really worry about Iran. And again, that will be what MBS and Saudi Arabia will also want to make the point, that Iran can't be trusted, that, the United States can't take its attention. And I think there will be some discussion around maybe the, the re-engagement with Iran around the Iran deal is not great for US Saudi interests.
So you're absolutely right. I think he's there to create this regional, I'm here, I'm back, after the Summit of the Americas kind of went kaput. nothing happened. Or things happened, but no major announcements, and it was kind of a dud. So I think this is his opportunity, or Biden's opportunity, his administration's opportunity to say, we're here, this is a successful region, we're reorienting strategy. And what I find fascinating, I want to bring up in our few moments together at the end here, is this his idea of putting together countries in different combinations to announce this shift. So, Nick and I were a bit talking before about the I2U2 summit. I2U2. So it's India, the US, UAE, and Israel as a grouping. It called the first time ever I2U2. And we just thought, how do you sell this new grouping? But somehow it's meaningful to somebody. India, UAE, Israel, and the US. What do you think of that combination, or as related to what Biden hopes to achieve versus the non-success of the Summit of the Americas? Will there be more successful policy pronouncements, more combinations like this I2U2?
I am with you on this, some of my confusion on I2U2. It's an interesting combination. Again, I do think UAE and Israel have been forging a closer relationship. I think that's a very interesting kind of some two countries to watch, and how they are both. I think historically there's been a lot of on the business side, but much more sort of political closeness as well. I think US has always try to use India as kind of a buffer against China's power. So here, okay, let's put India. India is is one of the biggest population-wise, one of the biggest countries. It's going to take over China in terms of number of people next year. It's a big power, right, in Asia. So let's put India there. So I do think the India part is calculated. I saw it in Central Asia. They tried to sort of like bring India into Central Asia as to sort of take some of that power away from China's. I don't think it was very effective, but nonetheless, I think that could be part of this this configuration. I would hope. I mean, again, I don't want to be that. I would like to be more optimistic, but again, I was very disappointed in the Summit of the Americas. I thought there were so many missed opportunities there. Again, I would hope that this visit, of the United States going to the Middle East could come out with more sort of positive outcomes. I guess I remain a little wary. And again, I don't think it's going to sit very well if there aren't some wins that the United States can, because otherwise I think there's going to be a little bit of a feeling of, why can't the United States get their foreign policy together enough? Like, why can't they be, again, maybe this is also part of the problem. I mean, I commented on the Summit of the Americas, it was like no real agenda. They had no, like, what were they really aiming to do? And maybe that's kind of, maybe there's a parallel. There's a lot that the United States is saying that it wants to do during Biden's visit, but some of them, again, I see as being contradictions, which in effect may just weaken everything that they're trying to do. So yeah, I wish I had a better sort of a more like, okay, this is my answer, but it's a little bit of a wait and see. It's hard. It's a different region. It's not like, that's why I find Saudi Arabia so interesting. It's, Saudi Arabia has like again, and I know we've talked about climate statecraft and everything, but like, even as the world, moves off of oil, and again, we're not seeing it now, but Saudi will be the last oil country standing in my books. So Saudi just knows that it has like it's got a power play that it can use. It's also a very wealthy country right now. I mean, you look at, $100+ a barrel oil, and you see what it has done to Saudi reserves, the sovereign wealth fund. This is a country that has money to invest. This is, so it can't, it's not just about the oil, right? It's about a lot of other things that, Saudi now has chips that they didn't have, when the US-Saudi relationship was, really originally forged.
And we will be looking forward to seeing what is going to be going on, and hope to have you back for more analysis post this meeting. Thank you so much, Carolyn.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always such a pleasure to be with you both. And thank you always for asking really fantastic questions and your own analysis. I'm always like, no, that's it. That's my answer too.
Thanks for listening to The Doorstep, sponsored by the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs. For more, go to carnegiecouncil.org. Stay healthy and safe.